So here's a little brief background on carbohydrates and a bit about their chemistry. So carbohydrates, one of the best ways to keep what carbohydrates do in mind is just breaking, or what carbohydrates look like, not do, look like in mind, is just breaking down the word itself. Carbon, it's a carbon ring. Hydrates, that's referring to the looks like water part of an OH group. An OH group is an alcohol group, and so a carbohydrate is a ring with carbon that is just absolutely coated with OH groups. These are oxygen with a hydrogen attached. An OH group is actually quite reactive, not like explosively reactive, but the just in terms of the organic chemistry, it's very easy for it to react with other things, which is pretty awesome for the cell. It means that it's able to take what is a single monomer of a carbohydrate and it can polymerize it to make it so that you actually have stored energy. So it's really great for stored energy. You can polymerize it into different shapes. You can polymerize it into these very long chains, and you can go one way or the other. One where you polymerize it into literally stored energy, where you can break it down later to burn it, or you can use it to form solid structures. And usually when you form a solid structure with a carbohydrate, it's not actually something you can digest. You want to be able to retain that structure. When I say solid structures, I mean solid. If you think about a tree and the bark of a tree or the woody part of a tree, it's actually mostly carbohydrates. And so that's what's giving this tree its very solid structure, is compacted laying down of a lot of polymerized carbohydrates. But in terms of the cell itself, it uses individual monomers most of the time, where they're dissolved easily in water. They're just floating around in the cytosol because, remember, they dissolve very easily, because if you were to go and look at our carbohydrate example, it is very polar, it has lots of oxygens, and it is very happy to be completely surrounded by water. It's pretty good energy storage. It's not as good as other energy stores that the cell has. There's really two types of energy storage that the cell carries. One is carbohydrates. The other one is lipids. Lipids are the better energy store because lipids don't attract water. So while lipids, if you were to have a bunch of lipids, you can compact them and have them all sort of floating together, stacked very nicely. Carbohydrates, instead, you would have them all surrounded by water. So if you were to have a carbohydrate that you were using for storage, it would also then be surrounded by water on all sides. So it's not really very compact storage. One of the other nice things about carbohydrates is that it reacts easily. So it can be added to structures or made to make polymers. And that's actually something that you see in animals in their cells. So while you don't usually see wood in animals, what you do see is if you were to have a protein, you actually will frequently get a polymer of carbohydrates added to it. So it reacts easily with itself, so you can make a polymer. It also can be easily added to other structures, which is great. You can sort of think of carbohydrates as doing two major things in animal cells. They're sort of the energy currency, and this is universal. Every single cell in the world is going to use carbohydrates in some way for energy storage, but also it's used frequently in signaling. So you can think of carbohydrates as almost like tags that are added on, tags and labels that are added on to various parts of the cell. So that's this portion of it. If you have a protein, you will often have little carbohydrate tags that are added. These are things that you've actually heard of before. If you have things like modifications of proteins with carbohydrates on your red blood cells, for example. you're going to have different surfaces if you had different carbohydrates to them, where things are going to be labeled differently and look different.